Hello again, and welcome again to the Mindful Policing podcast series. I'm your host. I'm Lloyd Wilkey, and I'm also the founder of the Mindful Policing Institute. Thank you for joining us. You know, one high school became central in the fight for desegregation in this country. In fact, it was Central High School, Little Rock, Arkansas. My special guest this day is one of the 9 brave students who risked life and limb to integrate Central High School. He's one of the Little Rock 9. His name is Dr. Terrence Roberts. In addition, he's a psychologist. He's an author, an educator, and I know him as something of a philosopher. And you'll get to see that too. He's got a lot to share with us this day, and so I'm anxious to get right into that conversation with him, as I know you are. And I'll see you on the other side. Dr. Terrence Roberts. How are you doing?
Well, it's my pleasure to be here, Lloyd, and thanks for the invitation.
First and foremost, what vitamins are you taking? Because I think I need to get a handful. You're looking great.
Actually, I do take vitamins every morning. I'm not quite sure what I'm taking, but my wife presents them. I take them, and we're off and running.
All right. Well, she's taking good care of you. I mentioned in the introduction, many of your different affiliations and titles, but did I leave anything out? I'm sure I did.
No, you did fine. May have added a thing or two, but that's all right.
Okay, great. Well, thanks again for coming on. It's really an honor to have you here, and you've been an inspiration to me for a number of years, and I really appreciate you taking out the time to spend with us here. I suppose for those who are watching or listening to this podcast, we should probably start off by maybe giving you an opportunity to give us a little bit of information about your journey, a little bit about your story. In case folks are not that familiar with, the Little Rock 9 and whatever you'd like to tell.
Well, yeah, that's a good idea, actually, because it's a good idea for several reasons. One, each one of us has a very unique story to tell, and all our unique stories are vital for everyone else, because as we share this planet, we share a lot in common. Not the least of which is that we are connected, and we're connected through our stories. Now, mine starts in 1941 in the city of Little Rock. Not a very propitious time for somebody like me to show up in that place especially. But as I found out later, Little Rock was not any kind of aberration, which was one of my early thoughts. I thought I had landed in a place where most of the people were insane, were mentally certifiable. But that proved to be erroneous as soon as I was old enough to move around and see for myself what was going on outside Little Rock. And the very same things were happening elsewhere. So I concluded at a very young age that I had to figure out how to survive this terrain, which was defined racially above everything else, by law and by custom. When I was born in the year 1941, the entire country was operating under the aegis of a Supreme Court decision that had been rendered in 1896. Now, that decision was by no means a starting point. No, that was simply and merely some sort of a codification and underscoring, if you will, that this indeed is the way we're going to go in this country. We're going to separate ourselves according to racial group membership. And if you happen to fall into one of the lower rated groups, not my fault. That's your lot. Run with it. So I was identified on my birth certificate as a colored person. I have since gone through several iterations. I was Negro for a while. I became African American. Now I'm Black. And there are some people who feel that I really need to choose one of those categories in order for me to be totally defined. I actually resist that. I simply present myself to the entire world as Terry Roberts. And that's the definition and the identity I'm most familiar with. Those other things are fairly specious. But in any case, as a very young person, I figured out too that it was dangerous territory for me to be in these United States. And I had to survive by developing some sort of a toolkit that would allow me to adequately respond to situations as they developed. Now, that's a lot to place, especially on a new human being, someone who just arrived. And yet, for all people who share my plight, this has been part of the story. That's been part of the story we live as Black people. In any case, I decided one of the tools I was going to use was learning. I had to learn enough so that I could outthink and outwit people around me. Turned out it wasn't that difficult because most people opt to be ignorant. They choose ignorance over knowledge. I don't know why. Seems to be somewhat deleterious in terms of choice, but so be it. We do have freedom of choice, which I do respect. In any case, in 1954, something fairly dramatic happened. The Supreme Court, the same court from 1896, in a new ruling in 1954, said in the Brown versus Board of Education case that it was no longer constitutional to discriminate. A long time coming, yes, but the law did change. And I want to underscore here that it is important. Whatever the law says, that is a very important thing. Now, even if the law is disobeyed, even if the citizens don't agree that this should be the law, it is, in any case, still the law. And so I felt pretty good at that point that the law was on my side, first time ever. I was 13 years old at that point, but the law was on my side. I took that to heart. And so when the time came for volunteers to join this desegregation effort, I was among the first to volunteer. And you can read about this story in your history books or social media, even wherever you get your news, and you'll find out more details. But suffice it to say, 9 of us eventually wound up as the Black students going to the Central High School in Little Rock in 1957. And a lot of chaos evolved, a lot of death threats, a lot of, whatever you can think of happened. We got into that school and we were there for 1 year, and it was really 1 year of hell. But we all survived. None of us were killed. We were injured, yes, mentally, physically, psychologically. By the end of that school year, we were pretty much wrecks. But we were determined, at least 7 of us were determined to go back because one of our group graduated and another had been kicked out during the school year for fighting, which is rather ironic since we had taken a vow of nonviolence, but it's very difficult when you're that young to really embrace completely the concept of nonviolence. And so there were 7 of us who let it be known publicly, especially for the governor's sake, that we were going back for the following school year, which prompted the governor then to simply use another ploy. He closed down all high schools in Little Rock, closed down all the high schools in his effort to keep Black kids out. Now, if you're listening carefully, that is not a decision that would rank among the wisest of decisions. When you close a school down to keep the Black kids out, you keep everybody out. I don't know if the governor was really aware of that. But in any case, rather than languish in Little Rock, wondering what was going to happen next, I had 1 year of high school remaining. I accepted an invitation from relatives in Los Angeles and relocated to LA in 1958. Convinced my entire family to follow me. So by December, all of us had given up our Little Rock citizenship and then decided to cast our lot with the Angelinos for what it was worth. Now, rumor had it at that time that things were better in LA. I didn't quite believe that, simply because of my own experience, my own knowledge. Back to reading, right, and learning. You learn, even if you've never been to a place, you can still learn about it. What I learned about LA didn't convince me that it was really the land of milk and honey. You still had the Plessy decision firmly implanted in the minds of most people. You see, in 1954, when the court ruled in the Brown case, there was a huge outcry. Many people said, no way, no way, we're okay with Plessy. We like what Plessy has for us. We don't like this even new way of thinking in terms of the Brown decision. And so I was not confused about where I was. In any case, I graduated from LA High and have since been identified as a Californian, except for a very brief 3-year journey into Southern Illinois for grad school. I have been in California. I live currently now in Pasadena. Interestingly enough, though, I'm contemplating and will be acting on a move to the south in a few days, going down to Marietta, Georgia. My wife and I are taking 2 boots with us because that kind of thing is needed in Georgia at this point. And so the battle continues. And that's a very quick sketch of who I am and my story, but you get the gist. You get the gist of it.
Thank you. Thanks. Yeah, I just can try to put myself in the shoes of a 13, 14-year-old student in those kind of situations. I don't know what that could have been like. I heard you say it was terrible. It sounds like a violent environment and caused, as you said, much trauma to those that were involved.
Yeah, it was pretty traumatic, and the violence was simply part of who we have opted to be as a nation. We've embraced violence. In fact, I might go so far as to say we love violence, as expressed in our really ongoing love affair with weapons, guns particularly. I heard a preacher once. I didn't see him, but I heard what he had said. He addressed the congregation early that Sunday morning, and he came up with a Bible and a gun, put them both there on the pulpit to let people know where he stood. He had God on one hand and God on the other. I don't know which hand. Well, hopefully God was on his right hand. But you never know. You never know.
I think I saw something on the internet, one of those memes that says, if you're so convinced that God will protect you, what do you need a gun for?
Yes. Rather conundrum when you think about it.
Yeah, it's interesting. I think I could, spend all day talking with you about Little Rock and about your experiences back then. But you know that I'm very interested in talking to you about policing, and I kind of want to get into that topic. But what do you do with yourself now? You mentioned that you're contemplating a move, but what do you do? What do you do these days?
Well, I have, after a career in psychology, I retired a few years ago and started a consulting business. So now my job consists mainly in helping people solve problems. My mantra for the work I do is wherever there are people, there are problems. Or if there are no problems, initially there will be at some point. And it's a very prudent manager who can anticipate what may happen, and then I get called in to try and prevent the most horrible iterations of what could go wrong. I know most people have a finite range of choices, and they choose over and over again from the same range. Once I can figure out the range, then I pretty much know where I can intervene. In fact, one of my starting points with any intervention is to try and figure out where people are mentally, where they are psychologically. And if I can figure out pretty much the range of choices a person seems to be making over a period of time, I know then if I can be of any assistance in helping him. And one of the first things is to alert the person to the fact that there are other choices available. Now, that may seem rather elementary, but you'd be surprised how many people are convinced that the only choices that are worth having are the ones they know about. They're not interested in finding out other options. It's too scary. And we can see that playing out on a large scale in this country already. A lot of fear and aggravation around who's choosing what. But in fact, all choices in the universe are available, but most of us don't know many of the options. We choose over and over. Sometimes we choose things that are detrimental to one's own self, to one's own well-being. And it's simply a matter of not knowing that there are other healthier choices available that gets people stuck in these ruts. So part of my job is that too, alerting people to the fact that the choices you are continuing to make are really unhealthy. Let's think of some other options that might be a little healthier for you. And if the person is willing, they can find them. Now, it's interesting. I don't consider myself as having the knowledge to help other people, but I have the awareness that these are the general possibilities. And I will do whatever I can do to help people find these options. So I'm willing to work hard. In fact, I recall when I was doing my psychology practice, I would always tell new clients when they showed up that I didn't really know how to help them. One, I didn't know who they were. We had to get acquainted. We had to develop what I call the therapeutic relationship. But within that, within the parameters of that therapeutic relationship, part of what I was doing was figuring out what their patterns were, what kind of choices are being made here, and what's the foundational principle for that, i.e. checking the background, the socialization process, who were the parents, et cetera, all this very detailed information, but so vital. Each one of us walking around as a very comprehensive data set. It's an interesting process when you get into it. And so now I'm at a point in life where I can walk into a room and look around and I get a sense of who's in the room just by talking to people. And that's a very valuable kind of thing to have. So that's what I'm doing. And I'll take this same skill set with me to Georgia. And there is a very fertile field, let me tell you. A lot to be done there.
Yeah, you may find a problem or two that needs some addressing in Georgia. One of the reason that I come to know you is that we've spent a lot of time in rooms of police officers and speaking with them regularly. You've come to probably pick up some new information over the years. Learning from the police officers and also in sharing your wisdom with them. I'm curious. What would you say? What would you say you've learned about policing in America?
Well, it's not a good sample for the whole nation, of course, but here in Southern California, I've learned a lot. All of policing is based on foundational principles that go back to the point at which policing started in this country. So one of the first things I've learned is many people who are currently parts of police forces have absolutely no idea of the historical roots of the police force. And why is that so important? Because for everything that happens, there is a past. And that past is instructive for what goes on in the present. And it also points toward what may happen in the future. Now, if you don't know the past, then you cannot possibly understand the present. And then what chance have you about going into a future in very favorable ways? That is, being forearmed with knowledge. And so that's been an incredible experience. And often I will quiz the group I'm working with, how much study of the history of policing did you get in the academy? And it's an interesting question for one, because I could expand the question. I could ask, even before you thought of entering the police force, did you do your own research about the history? I've refrained from asking that because I'm pretty convinced not many people do that about anything. But that's one thing I've learned. And I've also learned this, that many people, not all, but many people who go into policing have chosen to live in a very narrow band. The bandwidth is, finite. And they're unwilling to expand it to include what I consider to be vital information. That's extraordinary. But that accounts for a lot of the craziness we see. But in any case, those are the two things that stand out. And of course, some of the other things I've learned have been more general, not applicable only to policemen, but to people in general. And that is that many people are resistant to new knowledge. It's threatening. I don't know why that is. Why are people afraid of learning something new? I recall years ago, I was working in a job for LA County, just a wage earning kind of job for me. But I intended to leave there to go to school. And finally, when I made all the arrangements and I told my coworkers what I was doing, one of my coworkers came over, put the back of his hand on my forehead as a way of taking my temperature. He thought, you must have a fever. You're going to leave this, quote, good paying job to go to school? I said, well, yes. He couldn't get it. To him, it made no sense. Learning made no sense. What made sense to him was hang on to a good paying job. He says, I'm going to be here till I die. And I thought to myself, how tragic. What other opportunities is he bypassing by making that choice, especially at such a young age? We were all very young men at that time. And I could not foresee a future, for me at least, that did not include at least learning more than I knew at that point. I really knew I didn't know much then. In fact, I don't know much now. And you think about it, if this is still true, how much more important was it for me to get on about this business of educating myself? Not necessarily through a formal institution, but those are important in our society. They carry weight. If you have a degree from an institution, that sort of undergirds the fact that you have at least put forth some effort to learn. You can do it on your own. I mean, you don't have to go to school. You can go to the library and do something, do it another way. But by all means, be open to learning. And what I found is in the majority of policemen, there's not that openness to learning. And again, not all. Make that point clear. Let me make that point even more emphatic, because let's say not just police, but any group of people you can think of, you will never, ever find unanimity of thought in that group. That is, not every single person thinks the same way. No, never. There are always exceptions. So it's important to think that way, and in order to know that truth, because you get yourself into trouble by lumping people into groups and judging them based on that group membership. Can't do that. You can pick up some generalities, though, that are very important, because people in groups tend to behave differently than they behave as individuals. And by that, I mean this, and we'll use policemen as an example. If you are a policeman and you find it imperative for you to treat people with honor and respect, and yet if you're part of a group of policemen, many of whom don't have that same feeling, who treat people disrespectfully, you're more than likely not willing to speak up and say, I disagree. That's an important point. That's something about mob or group behavior that social scientists have studied for years. And the conclusions are always the same. Group behavior is very, very different from individual behavior.
Thank you. You're making me think about police culture. That's one of the things that I spend a lot of time thinking about, and that's what it sounded like to me.
Yes, indeed.
So, I guess using some of what you've already talked to us about, options, thinking, learning, growing. What are ways to change culture? What are there?
Well, you can't really change culture, but you can change yourself. And if you can convince enough people to spend time delving inside themselves, sweeping out the trash, cleaning up the space, making room for new information, for new ways of thinking, that is a tremendous start. I have this notion of what I call the basic building block of society, and it consists of dyads. two people. And the reason that I do that is because relationship is where we live as individuals. We don't live apart from others. No, I mean, there are some people, especially in this nation, because we tout this whole notion of individuality, and that's problematic within itself. The fact is, you cannot do anything by yourself. You think about it. You arrived here as a young infant. What could you do for yourself? Nothing. You had no ability. You didn't have the physicality. You didn't have the mentality. You had no notion of the historical background and the context in which you were born. You depended upon others. That was your very first introduction. And that will never leave. That need to be in relationship is always there. So back to the dyad, these two people, if you have two people who are willing to speak honestly and openly to each other, you have the possibility of building a strong relationship, because relationships are based on those basic principles of truth, honesty, and the willingness to say truly who you are in the moment. That's powerful. That's powerful. We don't get it in general, in society. Just think of it this way. If you look at marriage, you got a divorce rate that's just out of control. You've got relationships going south. You got people who go into former workplaces and killing people. That's something basically wrong there. But if the dyad is working, if these two people, and then if there are other dyads, let's think about a room filled with these dyads, all of which are working. That is a very basic building block for a stable and strong society. I dream about that because I think it could work. I've never, ever seen any example of that, but I can visualize it. I can visualize it. And as I visualize it, it makes so much sense. If you care enough about yourself and you care enough about the other person, you're going to be engaged in that work to build a dyad, not because you think there'll be any payoff, but because you figured it out. Your life is going to be enhanced and enriched to the degree that you're willing to do that. Now, we can apply that same principle directly to policing. Think about it. If you've got two police people working together, and if they choose to build one of these dyads I'm talking about, they become essentially a very useful and helpful, a two-person group. As they patrol, as they, fight crime, whatever else they do, to me, it can all go very different. So I would invite you to consider that, just in principle, not just about policing for yourself. Are you the kind of person who is willing to speak truthfully about who you are? Not many of us do. Most of us never tell the truth about who we are. We lie. It's one of the things that might, derail my thought about unanimity of thought, because most people do lie. Maybe that's one thing we have in common. We know how to lie.
Yeah, we sure do. I see it on Facebook all day. We don't present the real us through our social media accounts. Over this last couple of years, we've witnessed a lot. Our country's been through a lot. Our region's been through a lot. I guess I'm searching for answers. I'm searching constantly for ways to contribute to something meaningful, right? And so I keep thinking about the different things that come up whenever we have this type of unrest around us. Usually what tends to happen is that we look to policy. Policy seems to be the low-hanging fruit whenever there's an issue. So we're going to change the policy. But then when I hear you tell your story, the policy changed. It didn't necessarily change the behavior right away, did it?
No. And that's true. The change in policy doesn't change any behavior. It satisfies a need for some people basically to say, well, I tried, I changed the policy. And if that is the extent to which a person is committed to go in terms of pushing for change, that's not very far. And the commitment needs to be strengthened and pushed up a notch or two. Because if that first iteration, changing the policy, doesn't work, what's plan B? And if plan B doesn't work, what's plan C? You got to have something in reserve. Otherwise, most people are going to resist voluntarily following a new policy if they can get away with following the old policy. That's what happened in 1954. When the court said it's no longer constitutional to discriminate, a lot of Americans yelled and screamed and said, no, we want the right to discriminate. And we will do that. Now, how they did that in action was that rather than white parents send their kids to schools that were now integrated, they pulled them out, put them in private schools. Private school movement took off like a rocket in the wake of the Brown decision. Check it out. Look at the records. Look at the social science records to see what happened. Still going on when you think about it. That's an incredible thing, but it tells you the power of this whole notion of maintaining allegiance to an old rule, even if a new rule is in place.
Yeah. When we think about the current state of affairs, a lot of folks are gathering around the idea of civilian oversight of police. What are your thoughts about civilian oversight?
Well, I think it makes sense this way. If we consider the fact that policemen and policewomen are not a different breed or a different species of human, they're part of the community. We work together. And in fact, I don't even like this definition of civilian oversight and police. I would like to see some new language around it. I don't know what yet. But I'd like to see it in terms of we are together trying to figure out how we can best do the job of keeping everybody safe. How can we best do that? And that requires an allegiance and an alliance between the people who are sworn officers and the people who work in policing who are unsworn, along with people from the general public who are not identified as police officers and yet are very much a part of the community. If we can get all these voices in the same room, we might be able to figure out some answers. But, and I know the issue, we as a nation, from our inception, have glorified the we-they dichotomy, the us-them mentality. That has been so infused in our language, in our socialization, that we think it's just the way it is. We have a lot of people who rail against, quote, the government, as if somehow the government is an entity apart from who we are. No. Ostensibly, we have what's called a representative government. We elect people, our neighbors, to go and represent us in these halls of government, but they're not separate and apart. The White House is our house, okay, technically. And I know because of what's happened over the centuries, we've had it banged into our skulls that only a select group of people called the government get to go into these inner sanctums. But if it were working the way it's supposed to work, they would be walking in there, not as representing self, but as representing the constituency, the people who are at home in the districts. So I think the police oversight idea makes sense in that regard. And I would probably use different language called oversight because it seems to put the people who are on the committee in this role of being in judgment, perhaps. But maybe there's some different language that would help us out. But I think even without the language, you get the idea that whatever you call it, doesn't matter what you call it, just that there's a cooperation. And everybody's interested in how do we keep our community safe? How do we keep people safe? How do we convince people not to choose criminal activity, but to choose activity that enhances and contributes to society as a whole? When you rob a store, That doesn't help anybody. Doesn't even help you. But if you were able to figure out how we together as a society could convince each other about the efficacy of leading a life where choices are made to benefit the whole and not just the one person. I think sometimes criminals get the idea that if they have the opportunity, it's okay to do whatever criminal activity they're involved in, because if they can get away with it, they put one over on the owner, the government, the police. That's not a good way to think. We have to think more collectively about it. And unfortunately, we have lost our moral compass. I don't know where it's gone, but we don't have it. The moral compass is missing. It doesn't matter if you wear a police uniform or not. We all have to accept the notion that unless we can recalibrate or find and recalibrate our moral compass, we're going to continue to be in real trouble. And we've seen so many examples of people, police people included, who do things that are obviously outside the context of the law, but feel, that they are justified in doing it. Where'd that come from? I think it's warped moral compass, really. Totally warped.
Thanks. Yeah. You know that I've spent a majority of my adult life now involved with training police officers. I hear from a very large constituency of people that training police officers is a waste of time. I hear it from the activist community that, perhaps we should be abolishing police departments instead of training them. Training does little, if anything, to change the situation. Yes, I'd like to get your thoughts on police training. I've heard you say in the past that training without accountability is the real waste of time. Maybe we could talk a little bit about that.
Yes. I think I would think about it this way. In order to be an effective human being, back to something I said earlier in this broadcast, we have to learn what options are available for us. And if I'm a policeman, my personal goal will be to learn as much as I can about how to do this job in ways that enhances my well-being and the well-being of the people I'm sworn to protect. That would be my approach to it. Now, I don't know if you can, quote, train a person to do that, but a person can choose to learn how to do that. So whatever we call it, training, education, schooling, it has to have an element of helping people understand the reason why they're there to learn. What is it there for them? Well, the obvious answer is you have at your disposal more options, more ways of being. Let's say if you're in a stressful situation, if your only option is to pull your gun and fire it, that's problematic. You got one option, which is not that useful in every situation. There are some situations where pulling the gun and shooting it is obviously called for. But if you have that option as your only option, then you're in trouble. So I think in any kind of training or schooling or learning, there has to be this focus on the integrity of the individual involved. What kind of person are you? Are you willing to learn? Are you willing to be respectful and honor the life of every person? Is that something you're interested in doing? Then here are some ways we can do that. Taking a life has to be the last possible option, and everything else has been exhausted. And that's my way of thinking about it. But if it's the first option, obviously that's a real problem, because not every situation demands that. So whatever the issue is in terms of police training, it all starts with who are you and what is it that you want to do? What do you want to accomplish? And if it's simply, I just want to stay alive and by the end of the shift, I want to be able to, go home, that's not a good starting point because it may not always be possible for that to happen. And that, in my mind, would be rare. That would be a rare thing. But that's one of the risks of being alive in the first place. You know, I'm often amused at times when I'm teaching subjects and students want to ask me, is it safe in your class? And I yell in response, no, it's not safe. Life is not safe. But learning to live means that we take in the fact that there are some danger places, and you have to learn how to cope with those. You have to prepare yourself in advance to learn how to live in a dangerous place. But that's going way beyond what we started with. But the idea is that people have to know the truth about who they are, the truth about the context in which they work, and then make the decision. Am I really willing to work here and follow the principles that I want to live by? Or am I willing to learn how to live in a situation where other people are making different choices? And how can we create space for all of us to be at the same time? Now, that I hadn't thought about it, but that's one way of looking at policing. You know, we have a continuum. We have some people in society who have decided to act in ways that we call criminal. And I put it that way because it's up to us how we define criminality. Well, let's take something like theft. Is the person who comes late at night to your home and steals your car the thief? Or is the thief the bank manager who, using arcane rules and regulations, figures out how to extract money from your account and put it into his account? Is he the thief? Who is really the thief? You see, the job of the police person is to find the thieves. I think sometimes we forget that thieves come in all shapes and all sizes. They operate in all kinds of places. But because of our historical relationship with policing, see, that's another thing right away. If you understood the historical relevance of this, policing, at least in one strain, started as a consequence of people being enslaved, mainly Black people enslaved in this country. It was necessary, in order to prevent slaves from running away, to have these night riders going to catch them, slave catchers. They evolved, and they wound up combining forces with a group of people out of New York and Philadelphia called the Day Watch and Night Watchmen, and they collectively put together this notion of policing. But you think about that, if those are the roots, then the hammer was falling on poor people who maybe were stealing essential things they needed to survive, as opposed to the white collar people who were extracting money from your account without you even knowing about it. So just something to think about.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. You know, you alluded to it a moment ago, something that I read that you wrote in your book, Simple But Not Easy. It was the fifth level commitment. And you started going down that road a few minutes ago. I started to think about there. You know, I think the gist of it, of what I understood you to say, was we can do anything that we want to do. I mean, again, you're back to your options, your choices. We can make good choices, but it has to be something that we are committed to doing. And maybe we could talk a little bit about what those 5 levels are. That would be perhaps very instructive for some of us.
Yes. What Lloyd is talking about is, I ran across this concept some years ago of levels of commitment. When individuals decide on what they're going to do, if they're facing a situation where choice has to be made, they will generally do what they want to do. But they may often commit at a very low level if it's something they don't want to do. Let's take an example. Somebody calls you, who's the head of a committee, and wants you to join the committee to help out on some project. Now, if you've already scoped it out, you don't think the committee is that good and they're not doing very good work, you just might say something like, I'll think about it. I call that level 1 commitment. I'll think about it. Honestly, when you say I'll think about it, 9 times out of 10, you don't intend to do anything about it. That's just a convenient way of saying no. Akin to that, at level 2, is I'll try. I mean, how often have we said to a person, yeah, Scott, I'll try and make it, I'll try and do it, I'll try and donate the money. But it's very much akin to level 1 commitment. And you're not really going to do it. You're not really going to do it. Third level, I'll do what I can. Now, that's very devious because more often than not, you've already decided that in this instance, I really can't do very much. So you give an incomplete response. The entire response would be, I can't do very much, but I'll do that little bit. No, we don't want to be that honest. So we'll just say, I'll do what I can. And you know in your own mind, you can't do very much, or you're not willing to do very much. And so you bow out. Most of us live at level 4, honestly. Level 4, I call the legalistic position. And it's expressed this way: I'll do what's expected. And if you have a job that demands that you show up at 8 o'clock and then you leave at 4 o'clock, you will indeed show up on time. And you will also leave on time. And what does that do? It means that you're not available for that extra thing that could be done, needs to be done, might well be done, but you say, sorry, not my job. Level 4 people have a penchant for carrying around various and sundry copies of the job description. So if the boss asks you, are you willing to do this? You whip out that description, you read it down, oops, so sorry, not my description, can't do that. That's a level 4 commitment. The only commitment that makes any sense at all is level 5. Level 5 says, I will do whatever it takes to get it done. I'll do whatever it takes. Now, all of us have at some point in our lives committed at the 5th level. Because when those things come up that you really want to do, you'll throw out those old tired excuses of I don't have the time, I don't have the energy, I don't have the money, I don't have the opportunity. No. You'll find the time, the money, the opportunity, whatever you need, you'll find it if you really want to do it. That's true commitment. That's doing whatever it takes. And in terms of, thinking about what police can do, they too could do the same thing. They could say, we're willing to commit at the 5th level to do whatever it takes to restore integrity to our department, to convince the public that we really are there as keepers of the peace and not there to start war, that sort of thing. Yeah, that works. 5th level commitment makes sense, but doing it in a way that enhances self and other. I'm always on the side of doing things that help self and other, not just self or not just other, but self and other, because we're all in this thing together. And it counts. It counts a lot if we understand how important it is to be together in the enterprise. Going back to the oversight committee, that's an example of people working together, sworn and unsworn officers, along with people from the general public who are concerned about these issues, the willingness to listen to each other and share thoughts and ideas, and to come up with some sort of plan ongoing. And it's not something you do once and it's over. No, you have continuing communication because we're all evolving. We're all evolving. And whatever it takes, again, 5th level commitment can get that done.
Thank you for that. I tell you, each time I've picked up your book, it just opens to that page. And I have to keep reminding myself because I think I live at all those bottom levels a lot of times, and I have to challenge myself to get to that, to get to the top level and really do whatever it takes. I think too that this pandemic has taught us a lot about commitment. Getting away from policing for just a moment, I was thinking a lot about in education. For a number of years, I've been, active with some, people to try to get some changes to our education system, such as Smaller class sizes, right? Teachers have been screaming for years. I mean, for at least 15, 20 years, we need smaller class sizes. And, and all along, we kept hearing, yeah, well, yeah, we'll think about it. or,
Mm-hmm.
or we'll try,
Right.
but we can never get there. But as soon as we get a pandemic,
Mm-hmm.
suddenly we could figure out how we could get there.
Just take some impetus, right? Something, some catalyst. You never know. Sometimes people live their whole lives avoiding fifth level commitments simply because not simple. Reasons are very complex, really. None of our reasons are the same, by the way. No, people make the same kind of choice. On the surface, it looks like the same kind of choice, but the rationale for them getting there to make that choice, very different pathways to that point.
Yeah, oftentimes we need an incentive, or we need a push, or and in fact, there's never been any, as far as I can tell, any positive social change that's occurred without some activism that happened. And first and foremost, again, grateful to you for your activism, for standing up and speaking out and acting to make that change. And I think so often we paint today's activists with a broad brush, and that they're just this particular generation. We have all sorts of names for them, and we have all sorts of complaints about how they behave or misbehave, and yet there will be no change until somebody agitates. Do you think I'm right about that?
Most likely, and history will prove the point. Most movements for social change at any level starts with a single person or a very small group. Rarely will you find, there are exceptions. The one that stands out for me is prohibition. A very interesting kind of thing happened. For whatever reason, the powers that be in this country determined that we, the people, should not manufacture or sell or imbibe alcoholic beverages. And there was a groundswell among the people supporting a constitutional amendment. The Constitution was indeed amended. And you know how difficult that can be. But it was amended. At which point, though, the general public rose up in arms collectively and said, no, we fell for this, but it was not right. We must restore our right to drink. And so that constitutional amendment was changed. It was de-amended. So now we have freedom to drink ourselves silly. But, to me, it just underscores the point. If we really want to do it, and I make that point because if we really wanted to end police violence, racist behavior on the part of policemen, etc., we could do it if we had that same energy we had around drinking alcohol. We haven't gotten to that point yet.
Wow, there's just so many different directions that I could go with that. But I guess one of the things I'm thinking about is, as I sort of reflect on your story, and you started out talking about how you learned to negotiate at a young age your travels around your society in the face of what seemed to be just insane, behavior. I'm wondering, because I think one of the things I left out in your introduction is that you're a grandfather. Is that right?
That's right.
And I'm wondering what type of talk do you think your grandsons are going to need to hear from you or from their parents in regard to negotiating the world around them? Has that discussion already?
Oh, yeah, already years and years ago, and it's continuing. Very necessary, very necessary. My wife and I had to have the same conversation with our two daughters. And it's essential that kids know the truth. I often confront parents who tell me they're unwilling to tell their kids about the history that they've lived. A lot of my friends, for instance, told me that they were not going to raise their kids with a knowledge of the struggles they had to go through to get to where they were at that point. And my question was always, why? Why are you going to deprive those kids of the truth? Kids need to know the truth in order to develop their own toolkit. Now, I was aware as a very young father that I was not going to be around to take care of my kids as they grew beyond me. In other words, I'm going to age out before their life is finished, generally speaking. It doesn't always happen, but generally speaking. I would be remiss in my role as father if I didn't help them by telling them the truth about the history that they had inherited. They had to know and understand that there were some people in this world who already had negative notions about who they were simply based on their categorization as Black children, African American children. Had nothing to do with them, but this was the reality they had to face. So early on, they were able to figure out how to balance that. They had to figure out, okay, so this is who I am. Other people may think that I'm something different or somebody different, but I always have to know and center myself around my true identity. That's step one. That's where you live. You live within your own skin. But if you're vulnerable, if you go out without benefit of the historical record, you might assume that you're going to have the same perks and privileges that everyone else is and seems to be entitled to. And then when they're not on your plate, you begin to wonder. And more often than not, unfortunately, the first point of wonderment is, what did I do? What about me that's problematic? How did that happen? Am I a bad person? You see, psychologically, we get into real trouble. So by denying your kids the truth, you set them up to become warped in terms of personality development, in terms of their mental acuity even. But you can count on the fact that kids are resilient. They're not going to keel over simply because the historical record seems to be a bit traumatic. Well, it is. I mean, we've led a very violent and chaotic history in this country. And, when you think about it, other countries have been worse. For instance, we have not had to endure prolonged war in this country. There's some countries where young people go through their whole lives only knowing constant and ongoing warfare. Think about the attack on the psyche that happens to cause. I mean, wow. I'm just thinking about it now. I'm thinking about what's going on in Israel and in Gaza. And by the way, the historical record is very clear on that. Those wars have been happening for centuries, long centuries. It's not new, folk. It's not new at all. But at some point, somebody's going to come to terms with it and say, look, we've been doing it this way for centuries. Is there another way we could do it? Just pose the question. Is there another way we could do this? Seems simple. But like the book title says, it's not easy. It may be simple, but it is not easy. Because we get wed to these notions, these ideas, these belief systems that we log into early on. I don't know. I think I may have come into the universe with some sort of DNA component that told me, Terry Roberts, you've got to maintain balance always. You can't go off on some rabbit trail simply because it looks inviting. It may not be healthy, may not be helpful, may be dangerous. You got to figure that out. You got to know how to tell the difference. I think, and learning is the only way that can happen. And that learning, by the way, is not just formal education. It's learning from all sides and all times and all places. Learning in the spot where you live. Who are the people you're living with? What do you know about them? Simple stuff.
Well, I'm learning a lot just sitting here right now. I really appreciate you spending some time with me. I want to remind folks that that you actually have a couple of books out. The first is Lessons from Little Rock. And the second one that we mentioned is Simple but Not Easy. And I guess we can pick those up at wherever you buy books, right?
That's right.
All right. Doctor, I guess I have maybe just one question more for you, and then anything else you'd like to say, I'm open to it. What advice do you have for me? I think you know what path I've been on, and as I continue to try to build this institute, and as I keep noodling on new and improved ways of doing police training and trying to, in some ways, disrupt police culture and change policing from, the ways that we've been doing it. And, really, as you said, is there another way we could be doing this? I've been trying to, reinvent that. What advice what advice would you give me?
Well, I think the first thing I would say is what you're doing at this point is essential. You are creating an expanded awareness. Your listeners, people who are aware of the Institute and what it stands for, now have a component of awareness that they didn't have before they came into contact with you and what you have developed. That's a big step, because it speaks to that whole notion that I started off with in terms of awareness, knowing what the options are. And if you live in a society and you think that everything's okay, but then you come across, mindful policing, what is that all about? And you see, it opens a door to, stuff has been going on here that hasn't been very useful or helpful. Call policing, it stands as policing, but really is not. It's something else. And so what you're doing is very essential in helping people develop that knowledge base, that awareness, prompting them to read more, to get involved themselves in helping in whatever community they live in, becoming intimately involved by getting to know who the police chief is, walking in, saying, hello, my name is so-and-so, I'm a resident of this community. I need to know who you are. I'd like to work with you as a citizen. And so you offer yourself that way. So you get involved, and then you begin to pay attention. This is so vital and important to what goes on around you by way of policing. Don't think it's someone else's business, because whatever happens to the other person could potentially happen to you. You need to know. We need to know everything. One motto I think is essential to live by is that everybody needs to know everything about everything all the time. Now, there will be some who will tell you, no, you can't share information with everybody because it's not, it's imprudent to do that. Question that, because I don't believe that's true. But one book he wrote I like a lot is called Death at an Early Age. He's talking about young kids in school. In the preface to that book, he says the worst thing adults can do to kids is to meet them with minimal expectations. You're not expecting much. If you don't expect much, you won't get much. I expect a lot from human beings, kids and adults. I expect people to be actively involved. In fact, there's another quote I like a lot. It's by former Supreme Court Justice Oliver Wendell Holmes. As a 90-year-old man, he was celebrating his 90th birthday when a friend visited. And he said, well, Justice Holmes, what are you doing? He says, well, I'm reading Plato. He says, but you're 90 years old. Why are you reading Plato? He says, to improve my mind. Now, if a man who's 90 years old is working on improving his mind, what excuse have you for not doing your own improvement? But then he also said something else. And his words were this: be involved in the action and passion of your times, or risk the peril of being judged never to have lived. Now that's pretty stern. If you want to escape the judgment of really your life was inconsequential, then don't do anything. You're guaranteed to wind up in the very back pages of the history books. But if you do something, whatever it is that is compelling for you, and by that I mean you would do it even if you weren't paid to do it. You really want to do it, right? But by all means do that, because it can be a contribution to the rest of us. And another thing I said early on, we all share this planet. Our unique stories intertwine. We learn from each other. And if you fail to really share the skills, the abilities, the talents you have, you not only rob yourself, you rob me, because I don't benefit from what you have. We can all benefit from what we all bring if we're willing to be open about it and not hoard it for self. Selfishness and greed, those are the two elements that have plagued us from the very beginning. We don't need any more selfishness or greed. We need people who think differently. That would be my last thought.
Wow. Thanks a lot, Doctor. Once again, I'll have to replay this tape about 3 or 4 times and try to squeeze some of the juice out of that one, because I think that I still have a lot to learn, and I'm grateful that you spend a lot of time with us today. Once again,
my pleasure.
Once again, everybody, this was Dr. Terrence Roberts, and if you want to find out more about him, you can Google him, and you will find out all you need to know about how to reach him if you wanted to, and perhaps engage him in some work to improve your organization. I want to thank my special guest, Dr. Terrence Roberts. And I want to thank you for stopping by, for listening or watching the podcast. You know, if you were paying attention like I was, you clearly must have learned something in that conversation. I know I did. Did you notice Dr. Roberts' life-affirming language, his positive outlook? I don't know. I know that's something that sticks with me. In fact, take a look at this image. It's a word cloud. I collected some of the words and phrases that he used. Screenshot that. Carry it around with you. Maybe of some use to you at some point in the future. I know I will use it. Again, thank you. I want to thank my partner in crime, Mr. Maurice Wilkey, helping me to shape and to edit this podcast series, holding my hand through all this technology. I want to thank Ron Galinas, who produced the music for today's session. You can find his music on Spotify. Can I say that? In the no copyright, chill, soul, and jazz music section. Until next time.